Good morning. It's good to see you all. Welcome to Grace Bible. Welcome to this service. I pray that you're having a great December, a great Christmas season. Thanks again to Pastor Roy for giving me the opportunity to share this morning and to contribute in just a small way to our series of Christmas messages. Pastor Roy, for the past couple weeks, has been sharing from the Gospel of Luke. We're trying as a church to see the true story of Christmas, the redeeming story of Christmas through the lens of Luke. And so as we just heard from the Eckenroads, we're going to look again at Luke chapter 1, specifically at verses 67 through 79. I was working on this message this week, earlier in the week, and it dawned on me. I was reading through the text and praying through what the Lord would have me to share this morning. I think this is the first time that I've preached this passage. I've been involved in ministry, vocational ministry, for about 25 years, and I don't know that I've ever preached this. I'm sure, I know I've read it many times and probably have studied it with small groups, but the first time to share this. So I hope to do the passage the justice that it deserves. It's a unique passage for sure, in that when it comes to Christmas sermons, I don't know that we normally hear a lot about this prophecy that Zechariah shares, but as I hope that you'll see this morning from our time together, it is just full of encouragement for, truth about Christmas and encouragement for those of us who find ourselves in the midst of yet another Christmas season. I want to, before we look at this passage in particular, I want us to understand it as best we possibly can in its context. Why does Zechariah share this prophecy? And really, it's a song. So Zechariah is singing prophecy here. And there's a lot of, as we learned last week, when Pastor Roy shared Mary's song, the Magnificat, beginning with verse 46, there's a lot of singing in Luke chapter 1. Luke is not a musical. This is not a silly musical, but there is a good amount of singing in Luke 1, and singing that involves the Christmas story. Something occurred, something happened that moved this man named Zechariah to burst forth into song. In Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 5, we're not going to read it, I'm just going to summarize it for you, but verses 5 through 20, Zechariah is engaged in his work as a priest. And we're told that he and his wife together were both righteous before the Lord. That's important. Zechariah was working at the temple, and an important day comes about where it's not said in the text, but it's probably what we call Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so on that day, a singular priest would go into what was called the Holy of Holies. It's the innermost sanctum of the temple. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was stored. Inside of the Ark were the Ten Commandments. That's where the Shekinah glory of the Lord rested upon the ark. And there was only one day of the year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where a priest would go into that place. And he had to be righteous. He had to have purified himself and confessed his sins. In fact, what they did was they would tie a little bell to the ankle of the priest and a rope around his ankle, and that rope would extend outside of the Holy of Holies. Because if they stopped hearing that bell move, they would assume that he died, that God brought him down because of his unconfessed sin. So that's where Zechariah is, and he's lighting incense, and he's performing these important rituals. And while he's doing these things, he receives a visitation, the likes of which he's never experienced or encountered before. An angel, Gabriel, comes and speaks to him. And Gabriel doesn't have anything to say about what he's doing or how well he's lighting the incense or how well he's doing the religious ritual stuff. Gabriel says to him, "You and your wife Elizabeth are about to have a baby." And there's a lot of these, baby announcements that take place in the Scripture, especially the Old Testament. This is another one of them. This is why we as Christians, another reason why we believe life is so sacred, the importance of babies and the longing for new life. That Gabriel says to them, you're going to have a child. And it mentions what his name is going to be and the role that he's going to have and so forth. And then verse 18, let's look at that, 18 and 19. And Zechariah said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. Now that's a good play by Zechariah right there. Zechariah says, I'm old. She's just well-seasoned, right? She's just experienced. I don't know, whatever. I don't know if Gabriel chuckled or not, but this is how the angel responded. Gabriel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I was sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. I am Gabriel. I was sent to speak to you. An angel is a messenger. That's what the word in the Greek literally means. And I was sent to proclaim to you good news, the gospel. And behold, verse 20, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. So, Zechariah is rendered a mute. He's unable to speak for the better part of 9 months. And I think that's interesting, and it's worth our pausing for just a moment and thinking about why. Why did the Lord, through Gabriel, cause Zechariah, this righteous man, this priest, to become mute? If you think about it, and we looked at this a couple of weeks ago in Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38, when Pastor Roy was preaching about the angelic visitation from Gabriel that Mary received. Mary had almost the exact same response to Gabriel that Zechariah did. She also said, like Zechariah, she said, how? And Zechariah said, how? But we know that Mary was not forced to be mute, that the ability to speak was not taken from her. But there's a difference between these two individuals, right? Mary's a young teenage girl, a virgin, who is betrothed, not yet legally married to Joseph. She's never been with a man physically, and she's just been told that she's going to be the mother of the Christ child. And so she understandably asks in verse 34, how will this be? But Zechariah is not a young teenage girl. He's a priest. And his responsibility was to constantly set before the people of God, the Israelite people, the truth that a Messiah was coming. He was called to look forward to these things and to point other people to these things. And like many priests and pastors today, Zechariah, as a priest, was probably good at talking and not so good at listening, being still. So the Lord, through Gabriel, says, I'm going to give you a season of listening. I want you to chew on these things, to think about these things for a good while. Well, then we get to the passage right above his prophetic song, verses 57 through 66. Mary has come after Mary is told about this divine child that is growing within her womb. She goes and she visits Elizabeth, who is a cousin, a distant relative of hers. She goes and she spends about 3 months with Elizabeth. Mary leaves, and now it's time for Elizabeth to give birth. She gives birth to a son, just as Gabriel announced. She treasures this son, and Zechariah is there at the birth of his child, but he's unable to speak, he's unable to say anything. And then 8 days go by. And that's the time in the law when the Jewish people were required to go to the temple with the son, the firstborn son, who was 8 days old, and they would make sacrifices, as would later be the case for Jesus. But they made sacrifices, and the child was circumcised, and that would be the day when the child's name was announced. For Elizabeth and Zechariah, that wasn't something that people were wondering about. It was assumed, because this was their firstborn son, that he would be named Zechariah. That's just what that was customary. That's what happened in their culture. And so this baby, they've circumcised the baby, and now it's time for Elizabeth to formally say, or for, it would have been Zechariah's, duty, but he's not able to talk. And so it would have been customary for Elizabeth to announce the name of the child. And she says, his name will be called John. Not Zechariah, John. And everybody is just aghast. They can't believe what they're hearing. They're like, that's not a family name. And they're looking at Zechariah going, I know he can't talk anymore, but you still need to honor your husband. And they look at him like, yo, Zechariah, are you cool with this? And he motions for them to bring some sort of writing tablet that he can scratch something upon, that he can write on. And he writes upon this, his name shall be John. And at that moment, he is instantly and miraculously able to speak again. His speech is restored, and everybody is just astounded. They don't know what's going on. Their hearts are filled with this reverent sort of fear and awe. And the people ask in unison, according to verse 66, what then will this child be? What then will this child be? This is too much for them. And it's at that moment when Zechariah erupts into this song. This is amazing to me. He has not been able to speak for the better part of 9 months. And he doesn't say, well, hey, 9 months ago I was doing my thing in the Holy of Holies and this angel came and he just starts singing. And when you look at the song, as we will this morning, what's really remarkable is that 85% of the song isn't about his newborn son, John. It's about this other child that's yet to come. Mary's child, the Christ child that's growing in her womb. What I want us to try and see this morning through this song, again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is the true story of Christmas. It's good and appropriate that we would look at this text, that we wouldn't skip over it, that we wouldn't rush to something else. This I pray at least will be good for our hearts, for those of us who maybe are struggling this Christmas season for one reason or another. I pray that this song would warm your soul. I've got 3 points, and I thought maybe this sermon would be a bit briefer than normal. I told that to the first service, and it was as always, it was the same. So it's just gonna be what it is. But I've got 3 points this morning from the text that would, I hope, again, serve to remind us of what Christmas is all about. Here's the first point from Zechariah's song. Christmas means war. Christmas means war. On December the 25th, 1776, if you any fans of history, you know that's the time when we were engaged in the American Revolutionary War. I have a picture of a specific event that transpired on December the 25th, 1776. That was the day that General Washington led the crossing, his men, his army, part of the Continental Army across the Delaware River into New Jersey. So they're in Pennsylvania, along I guess what would have been the western edge of the Delaware River, and he takes his men across into New Jersey for a battle at Trenton. And this is significant. I share this with you because the war had been, I guess, about a year underway at that point. And when war first broke out, the colonists were doing well. They were pushing back against the British. Things were looking favorable. And then the British began to send more and more men, and they hired other nations. They hired mercenaries, hired guns to come and aid in the fight as well. And then they began to push back against the colonists. And so in December of 1776, the British were in control of 3 colonies, three of the 13 American colonies, and they were poised to take greater ground. Things were not looking good for the continental for the Continental Army and the colonists. And so General Washington begins to think we got to do something drastic. We're losing men to bullets, and we're losing men to desertion. We've got to do something or else. And so he comes up with this plan to take the enemy by surprise, to approach the enemy when nobody would expect him to. And so on this night, Christmas night, December 25th, 1776, they crossed the Delaware River when the conditions were far less than favorable. It was well below freezing. It was at first sleeting, and the sleet turned into snow, and there were, as historians tell us, dangerous winds that kicked up. And they go under the cover of night. It took them over 4 hours to make this crossing. And when they finally reached the other side, there was a garrison that was occupied by 14 Hessian soldiers, German mercenaries hired by the British. And they surprised them and they overwhelmed them, and it turned the tide of war because General Washington said, we got to take the fight to them. We're standing in straight lines and they're bringing the fight to us and we're getting decimated. We've got to go and surprise them and take the fight to them. Christmas means war. When I said that a moment ago, I saw a look of bewilderment on some of your faces. Some of you had like more of a look of consternation on your face because I get it. Christmas, for if not all of us, Christmas typically means peace and joy and elves and eggnog and high school football. And so some of you hear me say Christmas means war, and you're like, that's a bridge too far. We put up with your hobbits and your talking beavers and all those things, but don't touch Christmas, all right? I get it. But here's the thing. In order for us to appreciate and to embrace the joy and the peace of Christmas, we need to realize that a war was fought for our peace and our joy. That's what Zechariah is singing about in this wonderful song. Verse 69, he sings about and has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. That word horn means strong. And then, what is this horn of salvation, this strong one, going to do? Verse 71, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Verse 74, that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies. He starts singing about enemies, about forces that hate us, about being in the grip of some foe, of some enemy. And I don't think after being mute, unable to speak, only able to communicate with the power of his hands or through grunts, I don't think after that prolonged period of time that all of a sudden Zechariah starts singing about I don't think he's singing about the Romans who are currently occupying Israel. I don't think he's singing about one of the powerful nations that surrounds Israel that they historically did battle with. I think he's singing about an enemy with a capital E that we all share, that we all have. This enemy named Satan. I know we don't like talking about Satan. We don't like reflecting about the realities of evil or the reality of hell. But it would be a good thing for us to do from time to time to make sure that we're living with sober minds and hearts. Satan is a real entity, and he hates you. He despises you. He hates your marriage. He hates your family. He hates your heart. Satan exists. He lives daily to sow things into your heart like despair and doubt, depression and anxiety and fear. Satan exists to bring disunity and strife into your home and discord within the household of God. That's why he exists. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, our adversary, Peter wrote, our adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. That's the verse that you need printed on your throw pillow at your house. That's the verse that you need printed on your coffee cup. I love Philippians 4:13 and Jeremiah 29:11 and Joshua 1:9. Those are great, and we all have those throw pillows, but you would do well to sip out of the 1 Peter 5:8 coffee cup. You would do well to remember that you have an adversary that hates you, that wants to destroy you on a daily basis. I would do well to remember that. But here's the good news. Hang with me. Here's the good news. We have an enemy, but we also have this warrior with a capital W who loves us. He loves us, and he came to fight for us. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, Paul writes to Timothy the first time, and Paul wrote, here's a trustworthy statement deserving of full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15 is the mission, the military mission assigned by the Father to the Son. Go and save sinners. So what does that mean for us? It means that at the fulfillment of time, at the proper time, the eternal Son of God clothed himself with mortal flesh, and he came and he entered into a world that he had created, but a world that had become marred and darkened by sin. He went behind enemy lines to fight for us, to save us, to rescue us, and to set us free forever. And he does that. The warrior does, not with sword and spear or bow or arrows or some other form of munitions. He does it with love, agape love, and sacrifice. That's what the warrior does for us. That's what Zechariah is singing about, this one that's going to rescue us and set us free from the enemy who hates us, who wants to destroy us. I wanted to give you a picture that you could take with you in your mind, something that we could all kind of see, and maybe something we've experienced together that would help you to better understand the reality of what this text is saying and what I'm talking about. And so when I was thinking about this idea of Christmas meaning war, a particular movie came to mind this week. And at first, my plan was to show you a clip from this movie because of, I don't know, few weeks or a month or so ago, Pastor Roy showed a clip from the movie, the Pursuit of Happiness, the Will Smith movie, and that was great. And the movie that I was going to show you is not that movie by any stretch of the imagination. And so I went to YouTube and I grabbed a clip of this particular scene and I converted it to the right format and I emailed it to our GBF worship email, did all the things. I think that was Wednesday. In the middle of the night, Thursday, my eyes shot wide open and I was seized with panic and I thought to myself, what have I done? I'm about to show this clip and freak a lot of people out. I'm going to lose my job. Hashtag canned at Christmas. How many of you have seen the movie A Quiet Place? Okay. 8 of us. Fantastic. Okay. More, I'm sure. But there's all of us, like, if I raise my hand, is he going to call? I'm not going to call him. A lot of us have seen it, I'm sure. That was the movie, the clip from that movie I was going to show you, and probably not appropriate. It's pretty intense. It's one of my... I love movies, I love books, I love movies, you guys know all that. It's probably in my top 10, especially the first movie. I love the movie. And I think, I have a picture of the particular scene. I'm going to describe the scene for you that I was going to show. I have a picture of that. I don't have there it is. Here's the picture. And I'm going to have to, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to have to partially spoil it for you, okay? It's a great movie. It's a great movie. And what this scene does is I think it's unintentional, but I think this is, and I've told people this, I think this is the best portrayal of the gospel in cinematic history. Far better than any of the cheesy Christian movies that we've viewed and seen many times over. It's this scene. In the movie, you have a family. So, okay, it's an alien movie if you haven't seen it. Aliens invade. And the aliens are unlike other aliens that we've seen in movies. They're not able to see. They're able to locate their prey by the use of sound. So anybody that even a pin drop, they can echolocate to that source and they devour anything that makes that sound. And so the aliens are wreaking havoc upon the earth, and really much the movie centers upon this family. At first, a family of 5. I'm going to spoil too much of it. But there's a couple of teenage kids that the father is protecting, and in particular, there's a daughter, and she's deaf, And throughout the entirety of the movie, the daughter is headstrong. She's pushing back against her dad. She's a teenage girl. And she's fighting him tooth and nail. And he wakes up, the father wakes up every day to just love his family, to protect his family, to keep them safe. But she thinks she knows better. She thinks she's got other plans, other solutions. She's constantly pushing it back against him, and constantly trying to fight him and thwart him. And finally, towards the end of the movie, because of a series of events, the aliens have made their way to their farm, their ranch. They've destroyed the house, and the two children find their way. They're trying to get away from the aliens, so the two children run into this old abandoned pickup truck. And the boy makes a noise, and the alien locates them, and the alien comes to the truck, and he jumps on top of the truck, and he's clawing, he's about to get in, and the father has been previously injured, and we think, because the camera hasn't shown him in a little bit, we think maybe he's mortally wounded, he's gone. All of a sudden, the camera flashes back to the father, and he raises himself, he pulls himself up, raises himself up off the ground, he's bleeding. And the father looks at his kids. He knows what's about to happen. And then the camera pans to the mother who's in the house, and she's powerless to do anything. And the father communicates through sign language to his daughter, "I love you." And she looks at him. And then he signs back, "I've always loved you." Meanwhile, this alien is just scratching and clawing, about to get inside of this truck. The daughter knows what's about to happen. The father at this moment lets out this primal scream, this deep, guttural roar, and draws the alien away from his children. He sacrifices himself so that they can be saved and freed. And it's just a movie, and it does not compare in any way to what Jesus does, but that's our warrior Jesus, who came to make war, who came to fight for us so that we could be set free, who could rescue us from the hand of our enemy and our enemies and the one who hates us and anybody else who would hate us for following the Lord. That's what Jesus does for us. He fights for us. Christmas also means, go back to verse 74, Christmas means an end to fear. So verse 74 once more, that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear. We've all been, I'm sure, watching our favorite Christmas movies over the past couple weeks. Pastor Roy mentioned that a couple weeks ago. And like his family, you may have like a plan, a strategy for how you go about watching those films and in what particular order. All of those Christmas movies, the popular ones, have a line. Some of them have multiple lines that we, because we've watched those movies so many times, those lines have become synonymous with the culture. Somebody can just say that line and you know immediately what the movie is, who spoke it, who it was spoken to. Let me give you a couple examples. Teacher says, every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. That's an easy one. What movie is that from? It's a Wonderful Life. Kevin! I'm alone. You're like, what's going on with Pastor Wes? He's screaming at us. You smell like beef and cheese. Elf. Well, I don't know what to say. Well, I don't know what to say except it's Christmas and we're all in misery. What movie is that from? National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Ellen Griswold says that to Audrey in the kitchen. And then this one's from one of my family's favorites. My mom and dad and I, we would watch A Christmas Story on Christmas Eve. We'd go to our churches, Christmas Eve candlelight service, come home, eat dinner. We had it on VHS back in the 80s, and we would stick in the 90s, and we would stick that movie VHS tape into the VCR, watch that movie, go to bed, wake up the next morning, have Christmas. The popular through line of that movie, most quotable line is, of course, "You'll shoot your eye out." The actual line of the true Christmas story, the real Christmas story, the biblical Christmas story is this: do not be afraid. Do not be afraid is the most quotable line. That's the through line of the biblical story of Christmas. Do not be afraid. That's what Gabriel said to Zechariah at the temple when he first makes this announcement of this baby boy. That's Luke chapter 1, verse 13. Do not be afraid. That's what Gabriel says to Mary when he comes to her and shares with her this thing that the Lord is going to bring to bear upon her life and within her womb. Do not be afraid. In Matthew, that's what the angel, we're never told his name, but it's likely Gabriel. That's what the angel tells Joseph in a dream as he's considering all these things. Do not be afraid, Joseph, to take Mary as your wife. That's what a host of angels tells a bunch of shepherds out in the hills while they were keeping watch over their flock by night. The angels sing to them, do not be afraid. That's the line of Christmas. And that's what Zechariah is singing about here, that we might serve him, the warrior, that we might serve him without fear. Because of Christmas, there doesn't need to be any fear in our lives. But I'm wondering how many of you, like me, really need to hear that truth again this morning. How many of us are struggling with some fear? How many of us are currently held by the grip of fear? And the fear that I'm referring to this morning is not some phobia like the fear of snakes or the fear of high places or the fear of tight spaces or the fear of large crowds. Those things may be real and you may have those things, but I'm thinking about fears like the fear of man. How many of us are living in the hell of the fear of man? We're afraid of what somebody may say or think of us, and so we don't do it. We're afraid of what our a family member may say. We're afraid of what an in-law may say. We're afraid of what a coworker may say. We're afraid of what a teammate may say. We're afraid of what a neighbor may say, or a perfect stranger. We're afraid of how we might be received, and so we don't do that thing. We're afraid of how we might be received if we share the gospel. We're afraid of what somebody may say to us if we invite them to church, and so we don't. We're afraid to bow our head and pray at a table at a restaurant because we're afraid of what people sitting across from us may say or think. Fear. There's a song, a Christmas carol, a popular one, probably not one of the more popular ones, but God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen is one of my favorites. I think it's the only Christmas carol that mentions Satan, the vanquishing of Satan. Let me read the first verse for you. God rest you, merry gentlemen. Let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. O tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. O tidings of comfort and joy. That line, let nothing you dismay, it means dismay. Let nothing cause you dismay. Let nothing cause you to be afraid. Let nothing cause you anxiety. Why? Not because you've got some sort of hidden hero in your heart, not because you're like strong in yourself, but because of Jesus. Because of Jesus, because of the reality of the coming of Christ and his perfect life and his death, his sacrificial death and his rising again, we don't need to be afraid of what somebody may say or think of us. We don't need to be afraid of what someone may do to us for sharing the gospel or inviting them to church. We don't need to be afraid of anything. Wear that hat that you've been afraid to wear. Ask that girl to dance. Take that chance. Step out. If there's something you've been thinking about, but you've been afraid, what are these people going to think? Take that step of faith because of Jesus. We're told in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, Paul writes this last letter to Timothy, and he says, God has not given us, Timothy, a spirit of fear, but one of power and love and self-control. If you're afraid this morning, if you're in fear of something, that's not from the Lord. That's from the enemy. Paul writes those things to Timothy because he knows that Timothy is going to have to really step up. That there's going to be some areas of his life and ministry that are going to cause him, that are going to require some bold courage, some bravery, some gospel-centered bravery in his life. Paul would write things later in the letter like, you need to be ready to preach the word in season and out of season. Then you get to chapter 4 and it says, Paul writes, he says, I have fought the good fight, I've kept the faith, I have finished the race. Henceforth there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord has awarded to me and to all those who have longed for his appearing. And I think what Paul's conveying there is like, this is my testimony, Timothy, but this needs to be your testimony. And if you're held in the grip of fear, you're never going to realize it. If fear is dominating you, let nothing you dismay. There is no fear. Do not be afraid. Finally, Christmas means that light has come. Christmas means that light has come. Look at verse 76. So Zechariah, the first half of his song is devoted to the Christ child, the child who would come to be called Jesus. And then he pivots with verse 76, and he sings about his own child, and you, child, so that's John the Baptist, and you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord, his forerunner, to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people in the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God. And now he's going to pivot one last time away from his own child, and he's going to end his song by singing about the Christ child one last time. Look at the second part of verse 78. Whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high. Your Bible may say the dawn. To give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. To guide our feet into the way of peace. This light, this sunrise, this dawn, the light that guides people towards peace. This is not some abstract concept that Zechariah is singing about. You don't go mute for 9 months and then start singing a bunch of gibberish that doesn't mean anything. This light is a person. It's a proper name. It's Jesus. Go to John chapter 1 real fast. Look at John 1. So Zechariah prophetically sings about the light is to come. And now in John chapter 1, this is not John the Baptist, this is John the disciple, John the revelator. John, looking back upon the life of Jesus, begins his gospel this way. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light has shone in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Verse 9, the true light, this light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. Look at verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. We have seen this light. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. I got a question for you. Is there some darkness in your life right now? Is there some form of hard darkness? Is there some darkness that just will not flee you? Maybe you've got some situation, some circumstance right now that you're battling, and you've concluded that it is just hopelessly bleak, hopelessly dark. Maybe you have considered your circumstances and you have decided that there is no light at the end of the proverbial tunnel for you. If that's you, then I pray that the remaining 4 to 5 minutes of this message would encourage your heart anew this morning. I know that we're all in here in our church clothes. And I know that we all do this thing because I've done it too sometimes, where we've got some difficulty, we've got some suffering, we've got some trials, but we leave them in the SUV or the truck, and we put on a brave face and we come into this place. But I'm guessing that there may be 1 or 2 people who are in this place that I've been describing for the past few moments. A season of hurt, a season of darkness. If that's you, I'm praying, I'm going to sing to you that you might turn your eyes upon Jesus. If it's dark right now, would you turn your eyes upon Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, so that the things of earth would grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace? Would you look upon Jesus? That's what Zechariah is singing. I got to imagine this man, he's an older man, but he's singing this, and he's looking at his boy, and he's thinking about the Messiah, and there's probably tears that are welling up in his eyes as he's singing about this light. Because he's looking at some people like us, people who know what it looks like to have to sit in the darkness for a long season. He's looking at people like us who know what it looks like to camp out in the shadow of death. People who are wondering if it's ever going to get better. And Zechariah is saying there's one who's going to come, and he's the light, and he's going to lead us to peace. He's the Word. As John would again write, that he is the Word, the manifestation of the Word. He is the Word that provides, that is a lamp unto our path and a light unto our feet. That's Jesus. Our church staff has been reading this book, and I believe I've shared it with you before, maybe a couple months back, 2 or 3 sermons ago, called Heavenward. It's written by an author named Cameron Cole. He's a pastor, author, and he wrote this book as a response to some of the things that he learned. His young son, he had a, I think, 2-year-old son named Cam, who suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. And following the death of his son, his father just began to think about and he began to study the reality of heaven anew, just thinking about his boy that he loves and what he's seeing and beholding. He began to study heaven, and in his study of heaven, in his pursuit of heaven, he learned that heaven isn't just later, but it's also right now, that we who are in Christ Jesus, we're living with this dual citizenship, where we've got a foot in this world, but also a foot in the reality of the kingdom of heaven. And so it's a wonderful book. I would recommend it to you. At the end of every chapter, he has this little subheading called Your Heavenward Journey, where he just kind of brings all of this theological truth home, and he typically reflects upon his son during the closing remarks of each chapter. And I want to share just a paragraph or two from the conclusion of chapter 10. The scenes of suffering in our lives can overwhelm us. So often the scenery of life feels like nothing but images of pain. We struggle to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We question, God, is this good? Or God, where is the good in any of this? In these moments, finding a way forward seems impossible. In these dark times, I often ask myself, would Cam view this difficult circumstance? How would Cam view this difficult circumstance given what he can see in heaven? Cam can see God in his full glory. He witnesses the full goodness, purity, and wisdom of the Almighty God. He has the perspective of eternity. I do not think that my son looks down upon my life. While some find it sentimentally comforting, in reality, our loved ones above are not watching our day-to-day lives. God has delivered them from the fallen world, and they spend their days worshiping and gazing upon Jesus. However, if I could talk to Cam in these moments, I believe he would say, "Oh, Dad, if you could see the beauty of the Lord, God, as I do now, you would know what I know, and it's all going to be okay. You're going to make it." As I think about the heavenly vision of God, my problems, which seem overwhelming, begin to shrink, even if just a small bit. I pray for you that you would see the light. That if things are hard in your marriage right now, if you're considering giving it up, I pray that you would look to the light of Jesus. If it's a battle between you and your children right now, rather than throw your hands up in the air and wave the flag of surrender and just give up, I pray that you would look to Jesus. Look to Jesus. going to ask our worship team to come back up. I'm going to conclude with this. Jesus is the light, but he says something that I pray as we think about these words of Jesus in Matthew this morning, that you would think about them and see them and understand them anew this morning with fresh eyes. So Jesus is the light. He is the dawn. He's the sunrise. He's the bright morning star. He's the one that leads us into peace. But here's the thing, and this is, I think I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. This is more like Christmas Eve. This is why we light candles and share the light on Christmas Eve. This is why we do this, what I'm about to tell you. Early in Jesus' ministry, after he's baptized, he goes to the wilderness. He's there. He's tempted by the enemy. He comes back, and then he begins what we call his public ministry. And one of the first things that Jesus does is he preaches. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. He delivers the greatest sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount. And the sermon begins with these Beatitudes. And then Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth. And then he says this. And I think what he says next, for me right now, this season of life, I think is one of the most astounding, audacious things that Jesus ever said in this earth. Jesus looks at people, these people that came to hear him speak. It's not the religious elite, just everyday, ordinary, broken sinners. Jesus looks at them and he says, you are the light of the world. You're the light of the world. That's what Jesus is saying this morning to this group of everyday, ordinary, broken sinners. You're the light of the world. If you love Jesus, if you've given your heart to Jesus, then shine your light. Jesus said, don't hide that light. Don't put it under a bowl. Shine that light. Let it give light to everyone in the house. Let your light be like a city set on a hill that would give light to other people. You shine your light. I have I think there's been it's been a while for me where I love Jesus with all my heart. But I think there's been a season of me saying, I'm going to love Jesus, but maybe I need to conceal, for whatever reason, conceal this light or suppress this light. And not let this light shine. Like we sang, that silly song at Vacation Bible School. Don't let Satan blow it out or put it under a bushel or however the song goes. And I've been doing that for so long. Maybe some of you can identify with that. And Jesus is saying to us this morning, I love you. I love you. I fought for you and I'm fighting for you currently. You don't need to be afraid. You could step into a new day. You could shine. Your neighbor needs it. There's probably a kid on your football team or your basketball team that needs your light. There's a person at your work that needs the light of Jesus. There may be some people that you are shopping with this next week or eating next to this next week at a restaurant, and they need the light of Jesus. So let's be faithful. Let's shine the light. Let's stand and sing.